over here is because you can't quite see this side of the building. There used to be an awning here, not this handicap stuff, but there was an awning that said Criswell Predicts. It was gray and white stripes, and it said Criswell Predicts. Big awning that came out here. But over here, we'll let them. Over here was a bomb shelter.
No.
Right in this corner, and it had like a tower. It always reminded me of War of the Worlds. You know, I was waiting for the Morlocks. Now, my brother and I had a huge variety of pets, and what we ended up doing was using the bomb shelter as a sort of tomb for our dead pets. We pulled the top open, we dropped the body in, very like King Tut. We were actually very wicked children when I think back, but we meant well, which means something. That terrace up there always impressed me. As these aren't the original shutters, but there were shutters as well, and they weren't usable. And the terrace wasn't usable. And I remember asking my father, I said, Dad, why do we have a phony terrace and phony shutters? They can't be used. And Dad said, son, it's like Hollywood itself. Yep. It's all for decoration. It doesn't mean anything.
Is what he said.
Beg pardon?
It'll use you.
Yeah, well, thankfully they didn't, and I feel better. But no, there was grass here and all that. It's a funny thing, really, looking back. It was strange, it was bizarre, but there was a sort of weird normality about it. We used to go trick-or-treating around here, if you can believe it, at Halloween, because there were families living here. Anyway, down the street, Mr. Criswell also owned, or actually Mrs. Criswell, though we thought it was Mr. Criswell, also owned another house, just about a couple doors down there. It was always in the hands of hippies, as I recall. The
dirty hands.
Selma Avenue School was here, of course. They were public school children. We didn't talk to them. But this, no, it's weird, but it was weird then.
I think they got a little more going on than just throwing a car down there.
One thing you should also bear in mind that this was the era of Dark Shadows.
Oh,
And my brother and I kept running home from school to watch it. And a few years ago, many years afterwards, I got all of these Dark Shadows tapes of the return of 1795. Do you remember that? Well, that was the parallel time.
Oh, all right.
This was before Barnabas was vampirized.
Oh.
Victoria Winters is the governess. She gets sent back into time. And every episode opens with a seance has been held at Collinwood, one which has altered time and space and sent a young woman on a strange and perilous journey into the past. The faces of the Collins ancestors resemble those of their descendants, and Victoria Winters finds herself a stranger in a sea of familiar faces. So years later, well, then I should say that there's a denouement in the thing where Barnabas says to her, Victoria, this is before he becomes a vampire, Victoria, you're not like the other women. She says, you're right, Barnabas, I'm not. I come from another place, another time. I come from the year 1967. So Andre and I were watching this about 4 or 5 years ago. We just started laughing. And we looked at each other, and it was kind of obvious. The same thing had happened to us. And we said, a seance has been held at Criswell House, one which has altered time and space, and sent two young lads on a strange and perilous journey into the future. The remaining Kulo friends and relations are much the same, but a lot older. And Andre and Charles Coulomb find themselves strangers in a sea of aging faces. But you see, he and I come from the year 1967, and this is where we spent it. The last thing I'll tell you, before I begin to bore myself, is that one night we were in the apartment, as we tended to be, and there's a knock on the door, and Dad answers it, and it's Mr. Criswell. And he says, my movie's on, you've got to come up. So the four of us dutifully trooped up the stairs and sat down. Now, when you would sit down, they had this heavy, heavy furniture, and it was covered with dust. You'd sit down, and the clouds would rise. Now, Mrs. Criswell had an explanation as to why she never cleaned it. She said, and I quote, dust must form its own patterns. Then we would say, okay. So much of what Mrs. Criswell would say was like that, actually. Anyway, so it was the first time I saw Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Wow.
Was in Mr. Criswell's television.
That's awesome.
So the other thing I'll tell you is that I guess, Ed, you and I, if as and when the book is sold and comes out, we'll get our choice of dedicans. But my half of the dedicanding part will be to my mother. Why, you ask? Because it was Ma that got us this apartment. We had just moved out here. Now, I've got a terrible confession to make. We came out here because my dad lost his money. And he hoped he could recoup it out here, but as he said, even if we don't, we won't have to parade our poverty in front of our friends and relations back home. So, we had a place first at the Garden Court Apartments, the hotel up at Sycamore in Hollywood. And then we couldn't afford to stay there, so we had to find something else. Dad had found a job, so Mother and I were roaming the neighborhood looking for something to sell. Andre was in school. We saw the sign to let here. And we went inside. We knocked on the door. Mrs. Criswell was the first one we met. And she and my mother got on very well, which did not bode well. They got on very well indeed. So that was the start of it. And looking back, it was such a crazy time, such a peculiar time. The lads for sale were up the street at the Baptist church. The ladies for sale were down on Sunset. It was very odd. I remember walking past the Baptist church with my mother, and these two guys were wrapped around each other. And I was looking, and Mother says, "Don't stare. It'll only encourage them." But it was a very, very odd time and an odd place. And I have to say, whether or not I'm the better for it, I'm here despite it. And I really want to thank you all for coming this evening. I hope you'll all be back next year. And I hope that by this time next year, Mr. Canfield and I will be able to tell you that we have a book deal in progress. Let's hope.
Yay.
Yay. Cheers.
And remember, the weird career you conjure out of nothing may be your own. Thank you so much for coming, ladies and gentlemen.
Beautiful.
I guess that's it. There's any more. So,
Go back to the bar and drink.
pretty much.